The rifle lay across two sandbags that had been cut open with a rescue hook and stuffed with shale. And the young woman behind it did not look like anyone's answer to a problem measured in kilom. Mosa watched her left hand settle on the rebag with the same care a medic used to find a pulse. And he watched the muzzle 1,420 millimeters of carbon-wrap barrel and brake stop moving as if it had been pinned to the air. Down in the valley 12 away by the team's laser. The mortar tube flashed again from behind a stone wall and a strip of torn torp. One more volley and the ridge line would be unlivable. Put that rifle down. Ras had Barseel's sergeant voice, reflexive, the kind built to stop accidents. She did not flinch. She did not look at him. She did not do anything that would have counted as permission. She rolled the turret on the scope. One click, then three more until the numbers aligned with a line of pencil marks on a strip of tape she had placed there herself. Mosa could see the tape from where he lay because she had written small and because his own eyes were still good at 54 years old. At 13:09 local, with the wind at their position reading 11 knots from 2 o'clock and the wind in the valley doing something else entirely, she inhaled once, let it go, and pressed the trigger as though she had all the time in the world. The recoil came back in her shoulder and died in the bags. The sound took a fraction of a second to reach Mosa's ears. Muzzle blast, concussive, expensive, and then it was gone. Swallowed by rock. You stayed on the spot cope because that was what you did. You stayed on glass. You counted. The bullet was already out there, traveling through thin air at 3,600 meters of elevation, dropping in a curve that could not be explained to anyone who hadn't spent years watching gravity win. He heard the delayed impact as a soft, flat sound like a fist into wet clay, and he saw the torp in the valley shiver as if something underneath it had tried to sit up and failed. Then the mortar tube tipped over slow and final. No one spoke for 6 seconds. Rast's mouth was open. His hand was still half raised, the gesture of a man about to take something away. Mosa did not move. He kept his cheek welded as shale. He watched for a second flash. He watched for a second tube. There wasn't one. A second later, the radio in Mosa's left ear. Bone conduction taped down with a strip of sweat-darkened cloth crackled with someone higher asking for confirmation. And Mosa did not answer yet because his mind was still trying to find the correct shelf to file what he had just watched. The shot was not the thing he would remember most. It was what her body did afterward. The smallest exhale, not relief, not pride, just a controlled release of pressure from a machine returning to baseline. This was the first thing Mosa would remember years afterward when people tried to retell it with noise and brightness and the wrong kind of words. 9 days earlier, the helicopter had left them on a spine of rock at 422, and the mountains had taken the sound of the rotors and held onto the cold. The place on the map had a name in someone's database, but nobody used it. They called it a ridge. They called it the bowl. They called it the saddle. You didn't name mountains the way you name men. Mountains didn't care. Mosa's knees had begun to ache at 3,100 m. The familiar complaint of cartilage that had carried 32 years of weight and bad decisions. But he didn't mention it. Nobody mentioned the body unless it failed. He was there as a credentialed inconvenience. Master Chief, Warrant Officer, Sniper Systems External Evaluator. He had been asked to ride along with a SEAL element to provide a report that would feed procurement and doctrine, words on paper that would decide what other men carried next year. He had done it before in 2008 and 2014 in places where the dust got into the grease of rifles and into the teeth of people who thought they were in control. This ridge was different in the numbers. Elevation 3,620 m. Enemy mortar range 4,500 m if they had the right tube and the right charge. Friendly resupply window 18 minutes of flight time only if cloud cover stayed above 700 feet. If the mortar crew in the valley got a fix on their ledge, the rock they lay on would turn into a measurement, blast radius, fragmentation, casualty, evacuation time. The SEAL team was 12 men. The sniper pair was 2, a spotter, and a shooter. The shooter was Petty Officer First Class Eli Cade, 29 years old, right hand, mild asthma, better trigger break than anyone Mercer had seen in 6 years. The spotter was Staff Sergeant Cole Raskay, 35, Army liaison attached to the team, for reasons MSA didn't ask about, because the answer would have been bureaucratic. Raskay had a square jaw, a voice that could cut through rotor wash, and the posture of a man who had been right too often. There was one extra body. She walked off the helicopter last, carrying 2 green ammo cans and a long soft case slung diagonally across her back. The cans were marked in black stencil, 300 PRC and 050. The Merc knew from weight distribution in the rattle that at least one of them was something else. She was 24 or 25. Mercy guessed 68 kilograms with gear, maybe 73. Hair pulled down hard under a helmet that had been issued and never loved. Her sleeves were rolled at the forearm despite the temperature 2 degrees Celsius at dawn. And Moses saw faint white lines across her skin where gloves had once been worn for hours day after day until the body learned to protect itself. The men called her Ammo, not as a nickname, as a job title. Her actual name, said once during the manifest check at 411, was Specialist Lena, no logistics, MOS attached for load-bearing supply redundancy, and because somebody in a building far away had decided that the sniper element needed an extra pair of hands to keep it fed. Mosa had seen women on teams before in Intel, in comms, and Met. He had also seen the way some men reacted to anybody that didn't match their internal picture of what violence was supposed to look like. Raskay watched her step onto the rock and immediately did what Mosa recognized as an inventory. Hands, shoulders, gait, face. He was not cool about it. He was professional, but professionals still had assumptions. She's carrying the rifle case. Raskay, not looking at No. Kate adjusted his sling and shrugged once. That's what they sent. Ras made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Put it in her hands, and it's a rifle now. They did not turn her head. She moved to the edge of the landing zone, knelt at 427, and began anchoring the ammo cans under a rock lip as if she'd done it 200 times in the dark. Her fingers move in a sequence. Strap, buckle, tighten, half-hitch. She wasn't fast in the way anxious people were fast. She was fast in the way practiced people didn't need to think. Mosa noted it, and then he noted what didn't fit. The soft case on her back was too long for the team's primary rifle. It was long enough for a barrel that belonged to a class of weapons MRSA had only seen in testing ranges in Arizona and in a single classified demo in 2019 where nobody took pictures and the wind was measured at 5 different heights. Raskay followed Mosa's eyes and lifted his chin slightly. "That yours?" he asked. "No," finally addressing her. She looked up. Her eyes were dark, steady, unadorned. "It's a sign to the shooter," she said, and her voice was flat enough that it could have been read from a label. "You know what it is?" Ras pressed. "A rifle," she said. The men behind Ras smiled. "Not all of them." "Enough." Mosa watched News' right index finger when she said it. The pad of it was smooth. No callus, no scar from a slipped bolt or bad feed. That was the first clue, and it was the kind that only mattered to someone who spent his life looking at hands. Ras stepped away, and No went back to her work. At 4:31, she had the cans wedged and the straps locked. At 4:33, she was checking the team's water inventory without being asked. Mosa did not say anything. He watched. The ridge smelled like cold stone in the sour edge of burned aviation fuel that lingered after insertion. At 5:10, the team moved. They climbed 260 m in vertical gain over 1.4 kilometers of traverse, staying on the shadow side of the spine. Moses' breathing stayed controlled because he had learned how to breathe in 1996 at altitude school, and because he knew that pride got men killed faster than bullets. No kept pace without showing it in her face. At 5:47, when the team halted behind a seam of rock, she dropped her pack and placed it down with a careful orientation of someone who knew exactly where every item sat inside. Raskay noticed, because Raskay noticed everything that could become a liability. "You been up high before?" he asked her. "Fort Carson," she said. "Training area at 3,500 m." Raskay nodded once. Non-committal. "That's not this." New's eyes stayed on the ground where she was laying out rounds, counting by touch. Moses saw her lips move slightly. "Not prayer math." At 6:12, Kate and Ras set up their hide in a notch that gave them 38 degrees of valley view. The target area was a cluster of stone structures at 3,200 m across a bowl, with a road cut into the slope and a likely mortar position behind it. Mosa took out his own spotter, a 60x glass with a reticle etched in, and began building the valley in his mind. Distances, angles, wind patterns. He marked 3 prominent rocks as reference points because that was what you did when you might need to shift fire on distress. No, crawled them behind them with ammo cans and a small notebook. Ras saw the notebook. "What's that log?" She said. "We don't need a log," he said. "We need rounds when we call for them." She slid the notebook into her pocket. "Understood." Rask's mouth tightened. He turned back to his glass. Mosa watched new shoulders. They settled. Not slumped. Not tense. Just set. It was a posture of someone who knew where recoil would go. 6 hours later at 12:28, the first incoming mortar round walked into the bowl. The sound came before the impact. A flat cough that didn't belong in clean air, and then a thump down in the valley where someone else was firing and calculating. The first round fell 180 meters short of the ridge line, detonating in a spray of stone and dust that hung for 4 seconds before the wind tore it sideways. Ras spoke into his radio. "Contact indirect, likely 82 millimeters, origin grid, pending Kate stay calm." He adjusted his cheek weld, his hands moving in the small economy of a man who did not waste motion. Mosa watched Nell. She had frozen for half a second at the first thump, but not in fear. In listening, her head tilted by maybe 7 degrees, as though she were trying to locate the sound in 3 dimensions. Then she moved, crawling forward with the ammo can, opening it silently, and laying out 10 rounds in a neat line in the dust, each one oriented the same way, primers down. No one had asked her to. Ras glanced back at her and then looked away, dismissing what he didn't understand. The second mortar round fell at 12:29, closer, 90 m short. The third at 12:31, 40 m left. The fourth at 12:33, 20 m beyond the crew down. There was bracketing. Cade murmured a number, 4,000 and change. He said, reading the range winds ugly. Mosa saw Cade's jaw flex once. It wasn't fair. It was the mind recognizing a hard equation. Rascade. The radio answered with the voice of a commander not far away. Probably on another ridge. Probably looking at the same valley through another set of glass. "Hold. No CAS until we confirm." The mortar crew fired again at 12:35. Dust giz from the ridge line, 12 m from the height. The rock they lay on shuddered under the concussion. No's hands did something small. Her fingers curled and then released. A physical tell, not panic. Muscle memory. As if she'd been behind rifles when things exploded nearby. Mosa logged it in his mind. The day dragged. By 16:10, the team had taken 19 rounds within 100 meters. One man had a fragment in his left calf, SIP official, cleaned, and wrapped in 2 minutes. Another had a concussion headache and nausea, treated with fluids and a low-dose antiemetic. No move between them with a small medical kit that did not look issued. The stitching was reinforced at the corners. The zipper was replaced with paracord. She did not announce what she was doing. She did not ask permission. She just laid out gores, calibrated pressure, 40 seconds, then moved on. At 16:22, when a round landed 7 m away and rock shards tore into the edge of the hide, no sleeve caught and ripped. Moses saw the inside of her form. There was a scar line 9 centimeters long, pale, and straight. The kind left by surgery, not by accident. He had seen that scowl, and shoot his hood had tendon repairs. Raph saw it too. He stared for a moment, then looked away as if staring longer would give it meaning. A rehook landed in Moses' mind, uninvited. Something didn't add up. Night in the mountains came early, not by the clock, but by the way the cold rushed in like a tide. At 19:03, the mortar fire stopped. Either the crew had run out of rounds, or they had chosen to wait for daylight. In either case, the silence was not comfort. It was an interval. The team rotated watches. Mosa took second watch because he slept poorly anyway, and because old habits didn't soften with age. At 23:17, he heard Norm moving, not stumbling. Careful, he watched her crawl out of the hide 11 m to the left to a spot where the ridge gave a slightly different line of sight into the valley. She carried the long, soft case. She did it like it was not heavy, even though it should have been. Mosa followed, staying low. At 23:19, No opened the case and withdrew the rifle. It was not the 3000. It was a long-range system with a chassis and an adjustable cheek piece, a scope with a 34mm tube, and a suppressor that made the barrel look even longer. The caliber marking was not visible in the dark, but Mercer recognized the silhouette. He had seen it once on a range where the targets were steel at 2,800 m and the wind was measured with drones. No set it down, then set a small instrument beside it, a kestrel, the kind with ballistic solver. She turned it on, shielded by her body. Moses' heart did not speed up, but something in his mind turned. Ray's had been right earlier in a way he hadn't intended. Put it in her hands, and it's a rifle now. No did not chamber around. She did not point it into the valley. She did not do anything that would have given a shadow of a reason for punishment. She simply adjusted the scope's diopter, and then she ran the turret through a full revolution and back, counting clicks under her breath. At 23:22, she reached into a pocket and pulled out a strip of tape. She wrote on it with a pencil stub. The writing was small, compact, precise. It looked like dope. Drop, wind, elevation, density, altitude. Moses stayed where he was for meters behind her and did not speak. After 7 minutes, No packed the rifle away, picked up her instrument, and crawled back into the hide. Mosa waited another 2 minutes and then followed. Inside, Ras was awake, eyes open, not moving. He watched Ma slip in. "You see her?" Raskay asked quietly. Mosa nodded once. "Ammo girl running turrets in the dark," Raskay said. His voice was controlled, but the words carried an edge of offense, as if the universe had broken a rule. Mosa did not answer. He listened to the ridge settle under the cold. At 23:41, N's breathing went slow, not the shallow clip breath of anxiety, the even rhythm of someone sleeping between tasks. Mosa lay with his back against rock and stared at nothing. He had been asked once years ago to sign a classification memo about shooter. Not a sniper, a shooter, a competitive program, a national-level record, and a transfer into the military that required the record to be buried for reasons that were never written down. The shooter had been young then. The file photo had been grainy. The eyes had been steady. Mosa had not thought about that memo in 9 years. He thought about it now. The question had an outline now. Mosa wasn't ready to name it, but the outline was there. Day 4 brought the first real push. At 6:08, the valley road showed movement. 2 pickup trucks, 1 motorcycle, and 12 men walking in a loose line, weapons slung, heads down against the morning cold. The team watched through glass. Cad's rifle stayed silent. He was not there for harassment. He was there for the mortar. At 7:12, the mortar crew fired again. 3 rounds in 90 seconds. The impacts closer than before. The bracket tighter. The mortar tube was in a new position, 60 m east of the previous flash point, tucked into the shadow of a stone wall that had been built long before radios existed. Cade tried to get a shot at 7:18. Mosa watched him adjust for wind. The valley wind was reading 9 knots from 10 o'clock by Kestrel, but the mirage in the glass showed something else. An inversion layer at mid-slope, shifting. Cade sent 1 round. The bullet took 4.8 seconds to arrive. It struck stone 1.2 m left of the tube, throwing dust. The crew ducked. They fired again. Not consistent, Cade said, voice flat. Rassai stayed on glass. "We need them dead," he said. Mosa listened to the numbers. A rehook formed and settled. Heavy. They were going to run out of time. The problem arose at 10:46, and it was the kind of problem that only existed because everyone had been focused on the obvious threat. One of the team's radios, PRC 163, began to glitch. Not dead, not broken, intermittent. It transmitted in bursts that didn't match the push to talk. Mosa noticed first because he was old enough to remember when radios did not fail politely. The bows happened every 17 seconds, then every 12, then every 9. Ras cursed once. "Low." "Jamming," he said. "No." Moses said and heard his own voice come out sharper than usual. "Not jamming. That's an artifact. That's something else." Raskay looked at him. Mosa held up a hand. He listened again. The frequency shift the patent. It wasn't a hostile jammer. It was a handset trying to connect to a satellite that wasn't there. A wrong configuration, a human error. The fix was simple if you knew where to touch it. But the menu tree was buried under layers of settings designed by engineers who never crawled under rocks. Ras began to open his own handset, scrolling. His fingers were big, gloved, no. Sitting 2M behind him, leaned forward without a word. She reached over his shoulder and pressed the sequence. Menu 3, 2, 1, enter down twice. Enter. She did it in 4 seconds. The radio stabilized. The bow's pattern stopped. Raske froze. No withdrew her hand. She did not look at him. She went back to counting rounds. Raske stared at his handset, as if it had betrayed him by accepting her touch. Mosa watched Rask's face update in real time. A professional model shifting. You've done that before, Raske said. I've used radios, Nur replied. Ras's eyes narrowed. That menu is buried. No shrugged once. The smallest shoulder movement. It's in the manual. Ras made a sound that could have been a laugh, but wasn't. Mosa looked at Nu's hands again. Smooth trigger finger. Surgery scar. And now a radio menu sequence executed without thought. The pre-climax test had arrived. Ener had solved it before anyone fully recognized it existed. Ras' skepticism didn't vanish. It changed shape. Mosa felt the name of his question move closer to his tongue. It stayed unspoken, but it was present. By day 6, the ridge had become a routine of discomfort and calculation. Sleep in 90-minute blocks. Water ration to 2.4 L per man per day. Food reduced to cold packets because heat meant light and light meant death. At 14:05, a cloud bank rolled in low 400 feet above the ridge, and for 47 minutes the valley disappeared behind gray. The mortar fire continued anyway. The crew fired by map and prior bracket. Rounds landed closer. At 15:32, one impacted 3M from the hide, and rock fragments tore through fabric and skin. Kate took a fragment to his right shoulder. Not deep, not arterial, but it bled. No was there in 12 seconds with combat gauze and a pressure bandage. Kate's face did not change. He watched her hands. No packed the gauze into the wound track and wrapped it tight. Her fingers were steady. She worked as if she had done it on a range between strings of fire. At 15:36, she finished. She pressed 2 fingers against Cad's wrist. Check pulse. Released. Cade flexed his shoulder once. Testing. Ras watched all of it. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. He simply nodded once. A professional acknowledgement of competence. It was the first visible shift. Small, precise enough. Then the weather broke. At 17:10, the cloud lifted and the valley returned. The mortar tube flashed from a new position 120 m west behind a different wall. They were learning. The enemy mortar crew was not stupid. That mattered. At 17:14, Kay began to set up for another shot. He adjusted the bipod legs. He settled in. Mosa watched the shooter through peripheral vision because he was on glass. No was behind them feeding rounds. Tracking count. At 17:18, Cade fired. The impact struck stone again, 0.8 m low. Cade exiled once, slow. He adjusted elevation. At 17:21, he fired again. The impact struck the edge of the wall, sending chips. The crew ducked. The tube did not fall. At 17:24, a mortar round landed on the ridge line 18 m away, and the concussion slapped their bodies against rock. Cad's wounded shoulder jerked. His cheek weld broke. In a half-second when he lifted his head, Mesa saw a flash in the valley. Not from a mortar tube, from a rifle, a glint, a counter-sniper. Glass. Moses said in his voice was a warning. But it was already late. At 17:24 in 3 seconds, a round cracked overhead and punched into the rock behind them. At 17:24 in 6 seconds, another round came. This one found Cade. It struck the base of his skull, just behind the ear where the helmet met flesh. There was no sound from Cade. No cry, no time. His body went slack and heavy, and the rifle stayed pointed into the valley because the bipod held it. Rassan shot out, grabbing Cage's shoulder strap. He hauled him back 1 meter, 2 m out of the line. Blood darkened the dust, and moved forward fast, not frantic. She placed her fingers at Cade's neck. She held for 2 seconds. Then she withdrew her hand. Her face did not change. She began to pull the rifle back into cover. Rask's eyes were wide, but his voice stayed controlled. "Doc," he said into the radio. "Sure down." Head shut. No response. The radio answered with noise and a voice far away acknowledging. The mortar tube in the valley fired again at 1725. The round landed 60 m short. They were back to bracketing. Moses' mouth tasted like metal. He stayed on his spotter. He searched for the counter's sniper glint. He found it once for a fraction. A lens reflection 3,940 m away on a ridge line opposite higher by maybe 90 m. He gave the grid to Ras in a whisper. Rask relayed, but they had a problem that grids did not solve. Cade was dead, and the mortar crew was still firing. Raske shifted to the rifle, tried to shoulder it. He was a good shot at standard distances. He was not Cade. He looked through the scope. He cursed once, quiet. The wind in the valley was changing again. Mosa watched Ras's hands. They were big, strong, not built for delicate turret work under stress. Ras tried anyway. He dialed. He took a breath. He fired at 1728. The bullet struck rock 3 m right of the tube. The mortar crew fired again. Ras fired again at 1731. The bullet struck date 2 m short. They did not have time for learning. Mortar rounds landed within 30 m. Now at 1734, one impacted 9 m away, throwing a shard that cut across News's left thigh through fabric. She did not react immediately. She looked down. Her hand went to the cut. Blood seeped. Not arterial, but real. She wrapped it with a 10K strap anyway, not tightening fully. Just enough pressure to slow the bleed without killing the limb. She did it in 14 seconds. Then she crawled forward again. Ras did not notice her wound. His eyes were locked on the valley. Mosa noticed because he had been trained to infantry injuries, and because No's pain response was controlled to the point of being suspicious. No's voice came at 1736. "Give me the rifle," she said. No preface, no apology, no tremor. Razad snapped back. No, held his gaze. "You're not getting hits." Ras's jaw tightened. "You are ammo." No's eyes flicked to Cade's body for half a second, then back to Ras. "Is gone. The tube is still firing." Ras's voice rose. "Put that rifle down." Mesa heard the edge in it. The instinct to protect the sanctity of roles when the world was falling apart. And did not move. She waited. More to thump. Impact. Rock dust. At 1738, the commander's voice came over the radio. Lieutenant Commander Halden, 41, the kind of officer who had earned his rank by carrying weight and not dying. "What do you need?" Halden asked. Ras' voice was fast now. "Shooter Kia. Mortar active. I'm not making hits." There was a pause. 2 seconds, then 3. Main set options. Ma's throat was dry. He could have said the safe thing. He could have said they needed extraction, that they needed air, that they needed time. He looked at No. She was still. Her hands rested on the rifle like they belonged there. He heard his own voice come out in a flat line. Option is let her try. Ras stared at him as if MRSA had betrayed a religion. Halen's voice came back. "Who is her?" Ras swallowed once. He didn't like the words. "Ammo specialist." "No." Another pause. The kind where an officer makes a calculation that will follow him for years. "How far tube?" Halden asked. "Laser 4012 m. Mercy said. Silence again. Then Halden spoke and his voice was quieter than before. "No. Can you make that shot?" N's answer came without ceremony. "Yes." Hen did not ask how. He did not ask why. He did not ask for reassurance that fit his world. He said one sentence, and Mosa heard the weight in it. "You have 1 round before they shift." No nodded once, as if Halen were in front of her. Ras' hand hovered over the rifle, unwilling to release it. N's gaze stayed fixed. Now she said R's eyes flicked to MSA. Mosa gave a single nod. Raske let go. The rifle slid into N's shoulder as if it had been built for her body. Mesa watched her set her cheek weld, and he saw something that made the back of his neck tighten. She did not hunt for the eye box. She landed in it first try like home. The rifle was heavy, over 20 kilograms with optic and suppressor, but new support hand cradled the rebag with the delicacy of a pianist, and her trigger hand sat at a perfect 90 degrees break. More to thump impact closer. At 1741, New adjusted the turret. Mosa watched the numbers. 37.5 milliseconds elevation. Wind hold 2.1 milliseconds right. Those were not guesses. Those were the numbers of someone who had run this math before. Rass's mouth opened then closed. He did not speak. N's breathing was controlled. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 2. Exhale for 6. Moa counted without meaning to. The counter-sniper glint flashed again across the valley 3,940 m away, but N did not look at it. She stayed on the mortar because the mortar was the clock. At 1742, N's finger touched the trigger. Not a pull, a press. The rifle fired. The recoil drove into her shoulder, and she absorbed it without rocking. Moses stayed on the spot cope, tracking the bullet's invisible path through heat shimmer and thin air. He counted 1 second, 2, 3, 4. At 4.9 seconds, the torp in the valley snapped, and the mortar tube tipped as if someone had cut its legs. The delayed impact sound came back up the bowl, soft and final. Then nothing, no second tube, no second flash. The valley held its breath. Rass did not move. His eyes stayed on No, cycled the bolt once smooth, and did not chamber another round. She lifted her head slightly and looked to Mosa instead of to Raske or Howen, as if Mosa was the one who needed proof. Mosa's mouth felt like it had forgotten how to form words. He found one anyway. Where did you learn to shoot? He asked. No face stayed blank, but something behind her eyes tightened by millimeter. My grandfather, she said. He started in 1968. He died in 2004. 2 generations. Mosa heard it. He didn't need her to say more. Hen's voice came back over the radio. Clip now. Controlled. Confirm. More neutralized. Mosa spoke. Confirmed. Cube down. Howled and exhaled audibly a single breath through a mic. Good work. They did not respond to praise. She lowered the rifle carefully back onto the bags. At 1745, she reached down to her thigh where blood had seeped through fabric. She tightened the strap by 2 centimeters and then ignored it again. Raske found his voice. It came out lower than before. Who are you? Nur looked at him. She did not answer directly. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the strip of tape she had written on in the night. She handed it to Mosa. Mosa took it with 2 fingers. The writing was not just dope. It was a list of dates and ranges. 2016 1, 200 m, 10 tenths. 2017 1, 600 m, 9 tenths. 2018, 2000 mobile 8 tenths, and 1 line at the bottom underlined twice. 2019, 400 m. First round, Moses' chest tightened, not with emotion, with recognition. He had signed a memo in 2019. He had buried the record. He had done it because someone above him had told him it would keep her alive. He had told himself that was true. No's voice was quiet now. It was classified when I enlisted. She said it stayed that way. Rass's face shifted again, and Moses saw the second transformation begin. Not admiration, not something more unsettling. A recalibration, a quiet fear of having been wrong in a way that mattered. Mosa looked from the tape to No. He spoke the name he had not wanted to speak because names changed the world. You know, from the national circuit, Mercuz said that No's eyes did not widen. She did not nod. She simply reached for the rifle case and began to pack the system away. Methodical, as if the valley could reanimate if she gave it attention. Then the radio crackled again, and Hen's voice carried a new edge. Be advised, he said. Intercepted comms. Enemy element is moving. They know the mortar's down. They're coming up the ridge. ETA, 27 minutes. Nor zipped the case closed. She did not look up. She said one sentence that landed like a tool set down on a table. Then we need to kill the counter-sniper next. Silence. And then the ridge began to move. The ridge did not change when the mortar stopped. The air stayed thin. The stones stayed indifferent. The only thing that moved was the team's internal clock. Because when the indirect fire ended, it meant the valley would send something with eyes. Mosa kept his face to the glass and swept the opposite ridge line again, quartering in 0.3 mil increments, counting the seconds between each scan because the mind under stress tried to skip steps. The counter-sniper's position was still there in Mosa's mental map. 3,940 m, 90 m higher, an angle that made trajectories unkind. A man with a rifle and patience no-zipped the case, and then without being told, slid the Kestrel out and checked the density altitude again. Her thumb moved once across the screen, and Mosa saw the number 3,580 foot pressure altitude at their location, corrected for temperature, which was drifting down toward -1 degree C. Rask's radio crackled once more. Halden's voice came through, clipped, controlled. Enemy element is moving up slope. Estimate 18 to 22 personnel. They're using the GOAT track on the west shoulder. You have 27 minutes. The men around Mosa shifted their weight the way animals did when a predator came into scent range. Quiet, efficient movement, magazines checked, optics wiped with a sleeve, straps cinched. Nobody spoke unless it was necessary. Rask's eyes stayed fixed on Neo, and then with effort returned to the valley. "We can't hold this ledge with 12, he said. "Not if they get above us." Mosa did not correct him. The team was down one, and everyone knew it. Cad's body lay 2.4 meters behind the hide, covered with a poncho that was weighted at the corners with stone so it wouldn't flap. The poncho was olive green. In the gray light, it looked like another part of the mountain. N's voice came again, low and even. "The counter-sniper is the reason we can't move." Raske swallowed once. "You see him?" "I see where he is," Nurse said. Mosa watched her pupils. She wasn't tracking the ridge line the way most people did. Sweeping. She was looking at one point in the middle distance, as if the world had narrowed to a coordinate. Halden's voice over the radio. "Mirka, can you locate the counter-sniper?" Mosa answered, "Yes, but locating isn't solving." A pause 1.6 seconds, then solve, Howen said. Raske started to speak, stopped, and then did something Mosa would have remembered, even if the rest blurred. He reached to the side of the rifle case and pulled out the small tool roll Cade had always carried. Torque wrench, spare screws, a strip of lens cloth. He handed it to Newer without looking at her face. It wasn't an apology. It was a transfer of trust by action. No took it and slid it into her pocket. A rehook landed in Mosa's chest, precise and unpleasant. Ras had moved faster than Mosa expected. Then Mosa returned to the glass, because the ridge was still a ridge and time still moved forward. They could not stay in the same height. The counter-sniper had their position bracketed to within a helmet's width. If they shifted even 9 m, the sight line changed. The enemy would need to find them again. Mesa saw no look at the rock seamed to their left, the one that dipped and then rose, offering a different angle on the opposite ridge. It was 14 m away, downhill by 2 m, enough to change the geometry. No point at once, not dramatic, just a finger. Then she began to crawl. Ras gestured for 2 men to cover. One man moved left, another right, rifles up. Their muzzles tracked empty air because they did not yet have a visible enemy, but they had an unseen one, and that was enough. No dragged the rifle case with her. The case scraped once again stone, and Mosa fell, every head tense. Then she adjusted, lifting the edge, and the sound stopped. They reached the new notch at 1754. From there, Moses' spotter gave him a narrower but cleaner line to the counter-sniper's ridge line. The air between them was shimmering with late-day thermal currents. Mirage ran in bands, a visual eye that could throw a shot by meters at these ranges. No did not rush. She opened the case. She mounted the rifle on bags again. 2 sandbags and 1 rucksack adjusted in 3 movements. She checked the camp level on the scope, then tapped the bubble with a fingernail until it centered. Mosa watched her thumb the turret to the previous elevation and then back down by 0.4 milliseconds. It was not guesswork. It was correction for a new angle. Ras lay beside Mosa, his own rifle pointed outward, but his eyes kept sliding to Nu's hands as if the hands were the real threat to his understanding of the world. "Wind?" No asked. Mosa answered without thinking. "At our position, 7 knots from 1 o'clock. Midslope 12 knots from 10. Ridge crest on their side, looks calmer. Mirage shows left to right drift at 0.8 mil. Nor nodded once. She did not say thank you. She didn't need to. She dialed. The counter-sniper still hadn't fired again. He was waiting for movement. He would have seen the mortar tube go down. He would have known someone on this ridge could reach him. Mosa found the glint again at 1758. And this time he saw more. A patch of rock that didn't match. A straight line where no straight line belonged. The edge of a bipod leg. The faintest shift of a scope as someone adjusted. "Is there?" Mercy said, and he heard his voice go quieter. No's cheeks settled into the stock. Her left hand pressed the rebag. Her right index finger found the trigger. Rass's radio whispered. Halden again. Low now, as if he had moved closer to his own microphone. "No. What do you need?" Did not lift her head. 30 seconds, she said. Mosa watched a valley light change. The sun had dropped behind a spur of rock to their west, and the opposite ridge was now in a band of cold shadow. The counter-sniper's position was darker. His outline would be harder to see, but his thermal would change too, cooling, altering the way mirage bent around him. Null waited. Her breathing slowed, each exhale longer than the last. It looked almost like sleep. At 6 p.m. and 12 seconds, the counter-sniper shifted just 2 centimeters to adjust his own sight line. The movement caught a sliver of light on glass. Nu fired. The rifle's report slapped the notch, echoed once, and then was swallowed by the mountain. Mosa stayed on the spotter and counted again because counting was control. 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 5. At 5.66 seconds, the glint vanished. Not like someone ducking, but like an object that no longer held shape. The rock behind it puffed dust in a thin line, as if a chalk mark had been erased. Mosa did not see a body. At this distance, he would not. He saw absence. No cycled the bolt once. Smooth. She held the sight picture for 9 seconds after the shot, waiting for confirmation, waiting for any movement, waiting for the mountain to prove her wrong. Nothing. Raske exhaled a single breath he hadn't known he was holding. A rehoop came spare and sharp. They could move now. The enemy element was still coming. Killing the counter-sniper didn't dissolve gravity or footsteps. At 1804, Mercer heard the first sound of it. Stones dislodged far off the faint clatter that meant men were climbing in a place where rock did not like being disturbed. They had 17 minutes, maybe 15, before the first silhouettes appeared on the west shoulder. Rass spoke into the radio. Counter-sniper neutralized, he said, and his voice was flat, as if he was stating an infantry item. Howell then answered in less than a second. Copy. Exfil plan is still south. You have a window at 1910. Weather says cloud ceiling drops to 300 feet at 1930. Mosa did the math without wanting to. From their position to the south spur was 1.9 kilometers of traverse, with 210 m of descent under load with one dead man they would not leave behind. They could do it in 35 minutes if nothing went wrong. Something would go wrong. It always did. No. Looked at the poncho-covered shape behind them. She said one sentence, and it landed like a tool placed on a table. We take him. Rass' jaw tightened. We already compromised. And didn't argue. She crawled back to Cad's body and, without lifting the poncho, checked the straps on his vest, finding the attachment points for a drag line. Her movements were methodical, not sentimental. It was what you did when you refused to leave someone to the valley. Misa watched, feeling an old ache in his chest that had nothing to do with altitude. He had carried bodies before in 2003 and 2006 across places where the ground wanted to keep them. He remembered the weight, not the face. At 1808, N cut a length of 550 cord, exactly 2.22 m by Mosa's estimation, and threaded it through Cage's shoulder straps in a way that would distribute load and keep the body from rolling. Rass watched her do it and did not object. His skepticism was still there, but now it was directed at himself, and Mesa could see the way that kind of internal friction changed a man's posture. They began moving at 1811. Misa took Rasseh because he could still see better than most. Rass took point. 2 men flanked. No, and another operator took the drag line, alternating pull in 20-second intervals to keep from binging out in the thin air. The rifle case stayed on Nu's back. She carried it while dragging a dead man with a turn half-tight on her thigh. And Mosa watched her gait for signs of failure. There were none. That was not heroism. It was conditioning something built over years that did not announce itself. At 18/19, the first enemy rounds cracked overhead, not aimed, probing fire. The enemy had reached a vantage point and was shooting in a likely exfil routes, hoping to slow them. The team dropped behind a line of rocks. Mo suppressed his face into stone and listened to the round sound signatures. 7.62, likely PKM or similar. Range 600 to 800 m. Rasque raised his hand, 2 fingers, then a fist. Hold, but did not lift her rifle. She reached in her pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. She unfolded it with gloved fingers and handed it to Rasque. Moses saw what it was. A quick sketch drawn in pencil of the South Spur route, with 3 choke points marked and distances written in meters. 420, 680, 1,120. She had drawn in the night when everyone else slept. Ras stayed at it for 2 seconds. Then he nodded once and tucked it into his chest pocket. A rehook arrived with the clean certainty of an engineering drawing. She had been planning their escape before anyone asked. They moved again at 18:23. The enemy fire followed in bows, 3 to 5 rounds at a time, walking along the ridgeline. The enemy was not trying to hit yet. They were trying to hurt. At 18:31, they reached the first choke point. New had marked a narrow ledge 1.6 m wide, with a drop of 40 m on the left and a rock wall on the right. Perfect for an ambush. Perfect for a trap. Rasque signaled to stop. He scanned ahead. Mosa watched the shadows. No, crouched beside the rock wall and pulled out a small device from her kit, a compact thermal monocular. Civilian-looking, with the kind of housing you could buy if you had enough money in the right contacts. It wasn't issued. She lifted it, skinned the ledge ahead, then angled it up and left. Mosa watched her body stiffen by 1%, until she handed the thermal to Mosa without a word. Mosa looked 3 heat signatures prone tucked into the rock above the ledge, 18 m ahead and 6 m above. They were waiting. They had chosen the choke point because it made sense. Mesa lowered the thermal and looked at No. No's face was still. She did not need to explain. Ras saw Mosa's expression and understood enough. Contact, he asked. Mosa answered. 3. Above set for ambush. Ras' mouth tightened. He signaled for a flank, but the terrain offered little. They could not climb above without exposing themselves. They could not backtrack without losing the extraction window. No's voice. Low. I can clear it. Ras had snapped. With what? No. Reached into the ammo, strapped to her side, and pulled out 1 round. It was longer than the 300 rounds with a different shoulder angle. She held it up for MRA to see. Mosa recognized it. A specialized load, likely 375 or .48 408 class, designed for stability in transonic and subsonic regimes. And looked at the rock wall above the choke point. I don't need to see them with glass, she said. I need to know where heat is. Mosa understood. Not fully enough. Rasque hesitated for 2 seconds longer than he had hesitated with a mortar crew. This was closer. This was personal. This was men, not equipment. But the cost of loyalty was measured in minutes and buddies. Rasque nodded once. Do it. No. Move forward alone. Low. Keeping her profile tight to the rock wall. She set the rifle case down, opened it, and assembled the rifle in 14 seconds. Movements precise, even under fire. She did not set up on backs. There was no time. She used her pack as a rest, compressing it with her forearm to reduce bounce. Mesa held the thermal in his left hand, watching the heat signatures above the ledge. No scope was not thermal. She was shooting blind in the conventional sense. But she wasn't blind. She had Mercer's eyes. Mosa whispered, LFT signature 18 m forward, 6 m up, center mass. Second is 2 m right. Third is 1 m above them. No adjusted her aim, not with dramatic sweeps, but with tiny changes in barrel angle. She fired once. At 18:34, the first heat signature jolted and went still. Norse cycled, fired again. Second heat signature collapsed sideways, rolling out of cover. Norse cycled, fired a 3rd time. The 3rd heat signature jerked and then slid down the rock face, leaving a smear of heat. Mosa lowered the thermal. His mouth was dry. Raske stayed at Nu as if seeing her for the first time, and then forced himself to look away because looking too long would steal time. A rehook, quiet and final. The choke point was theirs. They crossed the ledge at 1837. The dead men above were not visible unless you looked. The mountain hid them. That was one of its few mercies. Enemy fire intensified. At 1842, the enemy had realized the choke point had failed. They began shooting more deliberately. A round struck rock 0.5 m from Moses' head and showered him with dust. He blinked, kept moving. Nu's thigh wound seeped again, darkening fabric. She did not touch it. At 1849, one of the team, Jarity, 27, stumbled around or grazed his forearm, a shallow furrow that bled more than it hurt. He swore under his breath, then caught himself. The word died in his throat, as if he remembered the mountain did not care. No reached him in 3 steps, wrapped the forearm with a pressure bandage in 20 seconds, and shoved him forward with the flat of her hand. No words. Competence is character. They moved. At 1902, the sky began to lower. Cloud ceiling dropped to 500 feet, the light dulled. The world turned monochrome. Halden's voice came again. 3 minutes, he said. Mark your position. Smoke on my call. Raske signaled. 2 men pulled out smoke grenades, the kind that burned thick white and could be seen from aircraft, even through haze. Mo's mind did what it always did in those moments. It checked for the thing that would break. At 1906, it found it. Nu's gait changed by a fraction. Not a limp, a hitch in timing. Her turn half tight had been doing its job, but the climb and drag had pulled at the wound. Blood loss was slow, but altitude made slow losses faster. Mosa moved closer. Your leg, he said, and heard the bluntness in his own voice. No glance down once. It's controlled, she said. Mosa did not argue with her. He simply watched her face for signs of narrowing vision, for the tiny dilation changes that came with shock. She was pale under grime, but her eyes stayed steady. At 1908, the faux sound of rotors came. A distant thrum. Low frequency felt more than heard. Halden's voice. Smoke. 2 grenades popped. White plumes rose, whipped sideways by ridge wind. The helicopter came in low at 1910, skimming the south spur, landing hard on a patch of rock that barely qualified as a zone. The crew chief leaned out, arm extended, signaling fast. The team surged forward with Cad's body on the drag line, lifting now. Half carry, half drag. Moses' knees screamed, but he did not slow. As they reached the helicopter at 1912, enemy rounds snapped closer. The enemy had line of sight now, firing into the smoke and the noise. The crew chief fired back with a mounted weapon. Short bursts, not to kill, to suppress. They loaded Cade first, then Jarity, then the rest. No step toward the ramp last. Rifle K still on her back. A round cracked and struck the rock near her feet, sending a shard that cut across her cheek. A thin line of blood. She did not flinch. She stepped onto the ramp. Mosa followed, grabbing her elbow for balance as the helicopter lifted at 1913. Nu's arm under his hand was steady, muscle taut, no tremor. The helicopter banked hard. The ridge fell away, becoming a gray spine under cloud. Mosa looked down once, watching the smoke smear into the air, and felt the old familiar weight settle. The mission had ended, but the accounting had not. A rehook came not from the valley, but from the thin strip of tape in Merck's pocket. The shot was only the beginning. They landed at the forward base at 1947. The air at 2,200 meters felt thick compared to the rich. Men moved slower now, the adrenaline boning off. The body tried to reclaim normal. Cad's body was carried into a temporary morgue, a shipping container with a generator and a smell of disinfectant. The poncho was replaced with a bag. The zipper sounded too loud. Ras stood outside the container for 42 seconds, hands hanging, and then walked away without speaking. Mosa found Halden in a small operations room at 2011, lit by red light and a single screen showing maps. Halden was sitting on a folding chair, helmet off, hair flattened, face tired in a way that did not dramatize itself. He looked up when Mosa entered. Report. Howen said. Mosa took out the strip of tape Nu had handed him, and placed it on the table. Halden's eyes went to it. He didn't touch it. "What is that?" Mosa answered. "A range card and a history." Halden's gaze sharpened. "New." Mosa nodded. Halden was quiet for 5 seconds. Then he said, "I'm getting calls already." Mosa didn't ask from home. Calls traveled down chain, like water, through rock. Howen rubbed his face once with his hand. "They're asking if we can document it." Mosa felt the old irritation rise in him. The one that came when people turned events into products. "Document what?" he asked, though he knew the shot. Howden said, "They want confirmation. They want footage if any exists. They want to know what system, what ammo, what conditions. They want to know if it's replicable." Mosa's mouth tightened. "It's replicable if you build people," he said. "Not if you buy rifles." Howden looked at Mosa for a long moment. Then he said, "You're the evaluator. Write it." Mosa held Halden's gaze. "I will," he said. "But there's something else." How waited. Mosa's fingers tapped the strip of tape once. "This wasn't her first 4,000, Moses said. She's done it before." Hen's face changed by degree. Not surprise. Recognition of a larger problem. He leaned forward slightly. "Where?" Mosa did not answer with a place. He answered with a fact. "In 2019, he said, on a range that doesn't exist on paper." Halden's eyes narrowed. "How do you know?" Moses's throat went dry. "The cost of loyalty now measured in different currency, because I signed the classification memo." Moses said, one sentence stand alone in Moses' mind. Halden's gaze stayed on M's face. In that gaze was calculation, and behind it a deeper question. Why had Moses signed, and what had it cost? How then leaned back, exiled once. "You're telling me we've had this asset and kept her carrying cans?" Moses said, "Yes." Silence. Then Hal then spoke. "Lo, who made that decision?" Mosa did not name the person yet, because names had consequences. But the outline in his mind had a face now, and Mosa had seen that face in meeting rooms for 2 decades. A rehoop delayed and heavy. The real fight wasn't in the mountains. No, it was in the medical tent at 21103. Sitting on a cut, pant leg cut away, wound cleaned. The laceration on her thigh was 6 centimeters long, not deep enough to require stitches, but deep enough to leave a scar. The medic had applied steer strips and a pressure wrap. Moses stood at the tent entrance, watching without entering because he had learned the boundary between observation and intrusion. No's face was turned slightly away as the medic cleaned the cheek cut. The shard line was thin, 3 centimeters already closing. The medic spoke to her, voice low, routine questions, dizziness, nausea, numbness. "No," answer with simple words. "No, no, no." Rask appeared beside Mosa at 21107. He stood with his arms crossed, posture rigid. For 10 seconds, he said nothing. Then, without looking at Nil, he said to Mosa, "You knew." Mosa did not pretend otherwise. "I suspected," he said. "I didn't know the shape of it." Rask's jaw tightened. "We put her behind us," he said. Mosa answered, "You put her where your model said she belonged." Rask's eyes flashed, but he didn't deny it. He stayed into the tent, not finished with the medic. She pulled her pant leg back up, careful not to smear the wrap, and stood. Her movement was controlled, but MSA saw the weight shift. She favored the other leg by maybe 8%. No walked out of the tent and saw Ras and MRSA. Ras' gaze straightened. He looked at her face. He opened his mouth. And for a moment, Mercer thought he would try to explain himself. Men often did. They tried to build bridges out of words because they didn't trust their hands. Ras didn't. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. Cade's range card, laminated, worn at the edges, the one Cade always kept. Ras held it out to Null. Null looked at it for 2 seconds. Then she took it. That was all. A rehook, quiet as a handoff. Ras had found the only language that mattered. The debrief began at 2320 in a plywood room, with 2 fluorescent tubes and a fan that did nothing. There were 7 people in the room. Howled in MRSA Raske, 2 intelligence officers, 1 communication specialist, and No sat at the far end of the table, back straight, hands folded. She wore a clean uniform now, still marked with dust at the seams. Her thigh wrap was hidden under fabric, but Mosa could see the stiffness in her posture. How then started with the facts, timelines, coordinates, contact reports. He spoke in numbers because numbers were safe. At 12:28, first mortar impact, Halden said. At 17:24, shooter Cade Kia. At 17:42, mortar crew neutralized at 4,012 m. At 6 p.m., counter sniper neutralized at 3,940 m. At 19:13, Xfil. The intel officer took notes. Pen scratching. The comms specialist nodded at intervals. Then the intel officer looked at No. Specialist, he said, we need to document your engagement. Round count. Hold over. Win calls. No's eye stayed on the table. 1 round on the mortar. 1 round on the counter sniper. 3 rounds at the choke point, she said. Total 5. The comms specialist leaned forward. What solver did you use? New answered Kestrel 5700 Elite Custom Profile, Measure DA, 3580 Tempest 1 to 2 win variable. The intel officer's pen paused. He looked up. Custom profile. N's gaze lifted briefly, meeting his eyes. Yes. Halden watched her face, unreadable. Who built the profile? He asked. No. Did not look at Halden. She looked at MSA. Mosa felt the small shift in the room. A subtle rearrangement of hierarchy. People notice when a person looked to someone else for confirmation. Mosa answered before Noah had to. She built it. MSA said. The intel officer's eyebrows rose. Based on what data? Mosa could have lied. He could have said classified. He could have protected the old choice with the same old reflex. Instead, he said based on a record that was buried. Silence. Halden's voice came after 3 seconds. Mosa, he said, warning in the word. Mosa held Halden's gaze. The truth is going to surface, he said. Better to control how No sat still, hands folded. Her face showed nothing, but Mesa saw one physical tail. Her left thumb pressed hard against her right knuckle, then released. Control pressure. The intel officer shifted in his chair. Specialist Nil, he said. Where did you learn this? N's answer was plain. My grandfather taught me. My father continued it. She said, we trained 6 years in elevation. Summer at 2,700 m. Winter at 1,900. Mat schedule from 2014 to 2019. The comms specialist blinked. Your father No's eyes lowered. He died in 2011. She said training didn't stop. 2 generations of sacrifice. Mosa heard it in the way she said it, without emphasis. Hen's face tightened. He looked at the intel officer. This stays in this room, he said. The intel officer nodded. Understood. But Mosa knew how rooms worked. Facts leaked. Not out of malice, out of gravity. People told other people because they needed the world to make sense. After the debrief ended at 0:12, Howen asked Noah to stay. The others filed out. Ras paused at the door, looked back once and then left without a word. Mosa remained. Howen did not tell him to go. Howen waited until the door clicked shut. Then he leaned forward, elbows on table. No, he said. Why were you carrying ammo? No's eyes stayed level. Because that's what I was assigned, she said. Halden's jaw tightened. And you didn't correct it? No. Shrugged. A small movement. I corrected the mortar, she said. Hal then stayed at her for 4 seconds, then looked at MSA. Who classified her record? He asked. Mosa felt the old memory rise. A conference room in 2019. A folder with red stamps. A man with gray hair and a voice like polished wood. Mosa answered Dr. Harov. Hen's eyes narrowed. Acquisition. Mosa nodded. Sniper Systems office has been there since 1994. Halden's face went still. He's coming. How do I want to own this? No. Did not react. She sat as if hearing weather. Mzur felt something shift in him, a slow reckoning. He had been loyal to Systems for decades. He had told himself loyalty meant silence. He was not sure anymore. A rehook, internal and irreversible. The classification wasn't protection. It was a cage. Dr. Malcolm Harov arrived at the base 36 hours later. At 10:20 in a black helicopter that did not carry markings. He stepped out wearing body armor that had never been scuffed in boots that still held factory creases. He was 62 years old, tall, lean, with silver hair and the kind of face that looked unwrinkled, Not because life had been easy, but because he had kept life at a distance. Mosa watched from a shaded corner of the flight line. He felt his stomach tighten, the body's quiet recognition of an old adversary. Crow did not look around like a tourist. He looked around like an owner. Howell then met him at the edge of the landing zone. They shook hands for 2 seconds, then moved toward the operations building. Mosa followed, keeping 4M back, close enough to hear, far enough to avoid being part of the greeting. Inside the ops room at 10:34, Hargrove stood at the table and spoke without sitting. He had a folder in his hand, clean, labeled with block letters. I understand we had an engagement that resulted in a long-range neutralization, Hargrove said. His voice was calm, precise, devoid of curiosity. I'm here to ensure documentation and classification are handled properly. Halden's face stayed neutral. We neutralized a mortar crew that was bracketing our position. Howen said, we prevented further casualties. Hargrove nodded once, as if approving a quarterly report. Good, he said. Now who took the shot? Howden did not answer immediately. He glanced at Mercer. Moser understood the glance. This was now not only tactical, it was political. The room had shifted domains. How'd insist? No. Hargrove's eyes flicked, a small movement that could have been surprise. It could also have been irritation. He recovered in 0.8 seconds. A logistics specialist, he said, as if reading a line from a file. Interesting. Mosa felt a cold anger that did not rise as heat. It arrived as clarity. Hargrove turned to Mercer. Master Chief Moser, he said, I recall you. Mosa nodded once. Yes. Hargrove smiled faintly. I believe you assisted with the 2019 program review. Mosa held his gaze. I did. Hargrove placed a folder on the table. We'll need to ensure this incident doesn't create misinformation. He said, we can't have operational myths interfering with procurement realities. Halden's jaw tightened. This wasn't a myth, he said. Hargrove's eyes stayed calm. I didn't say it was, he replied. I said we must manage perception. No was not in the room. That was not an accident. Crow had not asked to meet her yet. He was gathering the frame before meeting the subject. Crow continued, voice even. I'm told there is discussion of prior competitive history, he said, looking at Mosa again. If any such history exists, it remains classified. That classification exists for good reason. Mosa heard the old language, the one that wrapped choices in the cloth of necessity. Halden's voice was controlled. What reason? He asked. Hargrove smiled again. Barely. Operational security, he said, and force cohesion. Force cohesion. The phrase landed in Mosa's mind like a cheap tool used to fix problems the tool had caused. Moses spoke. Or to avoid embarrassment, he said. The room went still. Halden's eyes cut to Mosa. Warning. Hargrove's gaze did not change. Embarrassment is not a classification category, he said. Mosa leaned forward slightly, palms on the table. He kept his voice level because level voices carried further. Then say the category, Mercuse said. Say why you buried her record. Hargrove's smile faded by degree. Master Chief, he said, you signed the memo. Mosa nodded once. I did, he said, and I'm revisiting why. Hargrove's eyes hardened, not angry, simply colder. You do what you told, he said, because that is what you have always done. Mesa felt the sting in the truth of it. He had for 32 years done what he was told, and he had called it discipline. Now he looked at Hal, then back at Hargrove. Moses said, we lost our shooter because we didn't have redundancy, he said. We had redundancies sitting behind him carrying cans. Hargrove's jaw tightened. That is a tactical failure, he said. Mosa answered, it's a systemic one. Hargrove stayed at Mosa for 3 seconds, then turned to Halden. Bring the specialist in, he said. Halden hesitated, then nodded toward the door. An aide stepped out. Mosa felt his pulse stay steady. The body did not want to panic. It wanted to observe a re-hook, institutional and slow. Now the real confrontation would begin. New entered at 10:49. She wore a clean uniform, sleeves down. Her hair was still under regulation. She walked with a slight favoring of her left leg, controlled, minimal. Hargrove looked her over as if she were equipment. Specialist knew. He said, you understand what you did on that ridge will attract attention. Nora looked at him without blinking. Yes, she said. Crow nodded. Good. Then you understand why we must keep details contained. N's face stayed neutral. Details are contained, she said. They're in your files. Hogro's eyes narrowed slightly. My files. No, do not flinch. The memo, she said. The one you wrote in 2019. Halden's gaze snapped to Mosa. Mosa felt the surprise. No knew the memo's author. She had been reading the system that had read her. Hogro's mouth tightened. You have no need to reference that, he said. N's voice stayed even. You asked why there was a tension, she said. That's why. Hogrove leaned forward. You were assigned a role, he said. You executed outside it. No's eyes stayed level. My role is soldier, she said. My assignment was logistics. Hagro's expression remained controlled. Assignments exist for a reason. No did not argue. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something Mercer hadn't seen before. A small black drive sealed in a plastic sleeve labeled in her handwriting with a date. The 1st of March, 2026, and 3 numbers beneath it. Hardrow's eyes went to it. What is that? No. Place it on the table. Telemetry, she said. Solver logs, wind inputs, scope settings. 2 years of training logs, match records. The range you classified. Harrove stared at the drive. Mosa felt a shift in his chest. He had assumed news secrecy was passive. It wasn't. She had been preparing. Nor continued, voice steady. I knew the day would come when you would want to control the narrative, she said. So I built one that uses your own categories. Hoggrove's fingers hovered over the drive, then withdrew as if touching it would contaminate him. Those materials remain classified, he said. Nur noted once. They are, she said. That's why I sealed them. Halden leaned forward. What's in there? He asked, and his voice held more edge now. Nur looked at Halden. Proof of capability, she said, and proof of suppression. Hogro's gaze sharpened. Specialist, he said. You are approaching insubordination. No's face did not change. I'm approaching documentation, she said. Silence. Hogrove straightened. Master Chief Mosa, he said, turning to Mosa, you will advise your personnel to stand down. Mosa heard the phrasing your personnel. It wasn't Moscus. Crow was trying to reassert ownership through language. Mosa did not stand down. He said, she isn't my personnel, he replied. She's your consequence. Hardrove Jewel worked once, a small muscle shift. Mosa watched the human cost of decades of calculation flicker behind the eyes. The recognition that his neat classifications had touched flesh. Halden's voice came low and controlled. Dr. Halden said, what was the reason in 2019? Hagro's gaze snapped to Halden. For 2 seconds he said nothing. Then he spoke, and his words were careful like a man stepping on stones in a river. We were integrating new systems. He said we had to protect the program from variables that would trigger political interference. How to neuter was a variable. Hagro's mouth tightened. A story. He said a national-level shooter with demographic implications. It would have become a headline instead of capability. No's eyes stayed on him. Mosa watched her face for reaction. There was none except one tell. Her jaw clenched for half a second, then released. Hoggrove continued, and Mosa heard the justifications solidify in real time. We needed funding. We needed continuity. We could not afford distractions. Mosa felt the cold anger sharpen. So you hit her, he said. Hagro's eyes met Merku's. We protected the program, he said, and we protected her. No's voice came, the first time it carried any edge, and even then it was measured. You protected your timeline, she said. Not me. Hogro's face stayed composed, but his eyes flicked, a small movement that betrayed irritation or shame. Halden leaned back, exhaled once. You made a calculation, Halen said, and it cost us a shooter. Hoggrove's lips pressed together. You lost a shooter because you were in contact, he said. That is war. Halden's gaze hardened. We lost a shooter because we didn't have redundancy, Howen said. We had redundancy and labeled it ammo. The room went silent. Mosa watched Harov's face. The man was not cartoonish. He had likely believed his own logic for 30 years. He had built a career on the idea that systems mattered more than individuals because individuals were messy. Now an individual had produced a fact the system could not ignore. No's hand moved once, sliding the drive 2 centimeters closer to Halden. I'm not asking for recognition. No said. I'm asking for correction. Halden looked at the drive. Hogro's voice sharpened. The first crack. That drive is government property. He said, it will be secured under my authority. No, did not touch it again. She simply said, it already is. And the calmer voice made Moa understand the trap. Hogro frowned. Explain. No. Looked at Mosa for half a second. Then back to Hogrove. 2 copies, she said. One sealed. Hey, one sealed with legal at command level. Logged at 9:12 this morning. Halden's eyes widened slightly. You already filed it. No, not at once. Yes, she said. Hogro's face went very still. Moses saw it then. Not anger, not Faye. The human caste arriving late. A man realizing his control was not absolute. A rehook, single line, and irreversible. She had outflanked him before he landed. Hogrove left the room at 11:18 with his folders still clean and his posture still upright, but his steps were slightly faster than when he arrived. Howe then watched him go without following. When the door closed, Howen stayed silent for 8 seconds. Then he looked at Anne. You knew. Howe then said, No's gaze did not drop. I knew you would have to choose, she said. So I made it easier. Howe then exhaled once. Slow. He looked at Mercer. You're writing the report, he said. Mosa nodded. Yes. Halden's eyes returned to No. And you, he said, are no longer carrying cans. And did not smile. She simply nodded once. Understood, she said. Howe then stood. You could help me build redundancy, he said. Not in equipment and people. No's thumb pressed her knuckle again. The tell of control pressure. Yes, she said. Mosa watched, feeling something in him loosen. Justice delayed did not arrive with sirens. It arrived with paperwork and quiet decisions that alter trajectories. As New turned to leave at 11:24, Raskay appeared in the doorway. He had been waiting outside, not eavesdropping, simply present. No stopped. Raskay looked at her for 2 seconds, then stepped aside to let her pass. As she walked by, he spoke one line low enough that it was meant for her, not the room. Lena, he said. He used her name. No rank, no job label, no pause for half a second, then continued walking. Raskay stayed in the doorway, eyes forward as if holding a line. A rehook completed in a gesture. The skeptic had finished transforming. Mesa wrote the report over the next 3 nights. He wrote it in the same clinical voice he had used for years, but something in the architecture changed. He did not hide the human. He included distances, wind values, ammunition types, elevation angles. He included the timeline down to the minute. 17:24, shoot, 17:42, Morton neutralized. 6 p.m., counter, sniper neutralized. 18:34, choke point cleared. He also included a section he had never included before. Personnel capability suppression as a force multiplier lost. He wrote in plain language that Specialist News' competitive record had been classified and her role constrained, and that this had reduced operational resilience. He did not call anyone a villain. He did not need to. The facts made their own accusation. At 2:18 on the 3rd night, Mercer attached the 2019 memo he had signed with his own signature visible, and he wrote an addendum acknowledging his participation. It was not confession for drama. It was accountability for correction. He sent a report at 2:23. The next morning at 9:10, Hull then called Mercer into his office. Hogrove was there. The older man sat in a chair, hands on knees, posture still controlled, but his face looked older than it had 72 hours earlier, as if the skin had loosened slightly. Halen spoke first. Dr. Hogrove has been relieved of program authority pending review, Howen said. Hardro's eyes did not move. He stared at a point on the wall. Mosa did not feel triumph. He felt weight. Hogrove finally looked at Mercer. You could have stayed quiet, he said. Mozo answered, so could you. Hogrove's mouth tightened. I did what I thought protected the program, he said. Mosa nodded once. And you were wrong, he said. Hagro's eyes flicked down, then up again. In that flick, Mosa saw the human cost. Decades of self-justification cracking under a single fact that could not be spun. Crow stood at 9:17. His movements were slower now. As he left, He paused at the door and looked back at Mercer. I hope your correction is worth what it breaks, Haro said. Mercer held his gaze. It already broke people, Mercer replied. We're just naming it now. Hawgrove left. The door shut. Howen sat down heavily. He'll land somewhere else. Howen said, people like him do. Mosa nodded. Maybe, he said, but he won't hold this lever. Howen looked at Mercer. You're retiring, he said. It wasn't a question. Mosa felt the truth of it. He had been approaching the end anyway. 54 years old, knees worn, eyes still sharp, but not immortal. But now the retirement felt less like departure and more like a handoff. Yes, MSA said. After this cycle, Halda nodded once. Then help me build what comes next. Howen said. Mosa thought of new, sitting at the end of the table, hands folded, carrying silence like a discipline. He answered, I will. A rehook that didn't need fireworks. The legacy would be built in the same darkness it had always been built in. Nu's first official training block began 5 weeks later on a range carved into a high plateau at 2,900 m, where the wind never stopped and the targets could be placed out to 2,400 m without civilian eyes. Mosa arrived on the first morning at 5:40. The sky still dark, the air cold enough to bite. The range was quiet except for the metallic click of steel being hung and the soft scrape of boots on gravel. No stood near the firing line with a clipboard. It looked wrong in her hands only because people had been trained to see her with cans. The posture, though, fit back straight, chin level, eyes scanning. There were 16 students in the first block, 12 from special operations, 4 from conventional units. Ages range from 22 to 38. The mix was deliberate. Redundancy wasn't a niche. It was doctrine now. Raske was there too, standing slightly behind the students, arms crossed, face neutral. He had requested to be assigned as assistant instructor. He did not say why. He didn't have to. Mosa watched nor give instructions. She did not talk about inspiration. She talked about numbers. 0 at 100, she said. Confirm at 300, data at 600, 700, 1,200. If your solver doesn't match your impacts, you change the solver. You don't blame the wind. A student raised a hand. What about stress? He asked on the ridge with rounds coming in. No looked at him. Stress changes fine motor control, she said. So you build gross motor sequences. Same order every time. If your hands can do it half asleep, they can do it under fire. She turned to a table and picked up a small strip of tape. She placed it on the side of a scope and wrote on it with a pencil. The same small compact script Mercer had seen on the ridge. Then she held the rifle out to the nearest student. The student took it, looking uncertain, but did not reassure him. She simply said, read it, and waited. The student read the numbers out loud. Elevation dope. Wind holds. Temperature corrections. His voice was hesitant. Nur watched his mouth. Don't read like it's a prayer, she said. Read like it's a recipe. You follow it or you don't eat. The students shifted, attention tightening. They had expected a story. They were getting a system. Mesa felt something in his chest settle. This was what outlasted. Legacy built in darkness, visible only when needed. At 6:22, the first shot cracked across the range, steady and spaced. The sound was controlled, not celebratory. No walk behind the line. Watching shoulders, watching cheek welds, watching trigger fingers. When she corrected, she did it with a touch. 2 fingers on an elbow, a palm on a shoulder. No scolding, no praise, just adjustment. Ras watcher whack. At 7:05, one student flinched at recoil, blinking hard. No stopped behind him, waited for his breathing to settle, then said one sentence. You're not afraid of the rifle, she said. You afraid of your own reaction? Fix the reaction. The student swallowed and nodded. Mosa looked at Nu's right index finger again. It was still smooth. Not because she didn't shoot, because she shot correctly. A rehook, subtle as anatomy. Competence leaves different marks than people expect. 2 years later, at 1612 on a late summer afternoon, Mercer returned to the same plateau range, now expanded. 3 firing lines, a classroom building, a small wind tower with sensors at 2M, 5M, and 10 meters. The program had grown to 48 graduates per year. The graduates were distributed across units, not as lone geniuses, but as nodes in a network. Redundancy in flesh. Mosa walked slowly now. His knees had not improved with retirement, but his eyes still tracked the wind flags out of habit, noting the shift from 8 knots to 14 in less than 3 minutes. No stood at the far end of the range near the long line, watching a student settle in. Her hair was tied back. Her posture was unchanged. The rifle in front of the student rested on 2 sandbags cut open and filled with shale. The sight of the sandbags pulled Mercer backward for a fraction of a second to 1309 local on the ridge, to the rifles recalled dying into rock, to the torp shivering to silence. No did not look back at Mirka. She was facing forward, eyes on the student's breathing. Rask stood beside her, now holding a clipboard, writing down wind calls. He did not speak unless No asked a question. Moses stepped closer and stopped 3M behind them. No spoke to the student. "Inhale," she said. "Exhale, press. Don't pull." The student fired. The steel target at 1,800 m rang after a delay, a clean tone carried by wind. No nodded once, then pointed to the tape on the scope. "Update your dope," she said. Mosa watched her hand lift. The same hand that had taken the rifle when the sergeant barked. The same hand that had placed a seal drive on a table and shifted power without raising her voice. The rifle stayed on the bags. The wind kept moving. The student's hands wrote numbers on tape in small compact script. No stood behind him, weight balanced, eyes forward. And when the next round chambered, she did not look back. In October of the 3rd year, Mosa received the first proof that the program had outgrown the plateau. It came as an after-action packet at 6:18, delivered to his personal inbox with a subject line reduced to 3 words and a grid. Kuna Ridge 7. He was 56 now, retired on paper, still listed as a consulting reviewer for the doctrine office because the system rarely let go of people who knew where the bodies of old decisions were buried. He opened a file on a kitchen table that still carried faint circular stains from coffee mugs and cleaning solvent. Outside, the morning temperature sat at 4 degrees Celsius, and his left knee complained the way it always did when the barometer shifted. The packet was dry at first. Coordinates, call signs, times until it reached the line that mattered. Shooter casualty at 1402. Replacement shooter engaged at 1406. Target neutralized at 2,860 m. First round impact. Mosa read the sentence twice. Then he read the name under replacement shooter. It wasn't L. It was a corporal he recognized from the plateau roster. Mateo Lenz, 26, prior artillery, hand steady in the way people got steady when they had learned that panic never improved outcomes. Mizell leaned back in his chair and stared for 7 seconds at the window above the sink. He could see his own faint reflection. Older, grayer, the same eyes. The legacy had moved. Quietly, he scrolled. The narrative described a patrol pinned on a shale ridge line at 3,140 m, enemy machine gun fire from a saddle, and a spotter who had been forced to step into the shooter's role when the shooter took a fragment to the throat. It described a wind reading 14 knots at their position, a lower valley wind at 8, and a shot taken across a bowl where Mirage bent hard enough to lie. The corporal had fired once, then silence. No celebration, no quoted words, just a line in the report. Replacement shooter used tape dope on optic adjusted 0.6 mil for angle change. Confirmed by spotter. Tape dope. Mesa could see it as if it were in front of him. Pencil marks, small numbers, the same script wrote on the ridge when men were still calling her ammo. A rehook arrived in Moses' chest, spare and clinical. The ridge had replicated itself. He read the attached photo anyway, though the image quality was poor. A rifle on 2 sandbags, a strip of beige tape on the turret housing, numbers written in compact block. Moses' thumb hovered over the screen for a moment, then withdrew. He didn't need to zoom. He already knew the handwriting style. Not new specifically. Hayes was too clean, but the style she had taught, the one that refused to depend on memory when blood and altitude made memory unreliable. He printed the packet and marked 3 lines in pen. 1402, 1406, 2,860 m, then folded it and slid it into a folder label with a date he did not expect to keep. He made coffee at 6:31, measured the water to 340 milliliters out of habit, and stood at the counter listening to the machine's drip cadence as if it were radio traffic. Then he picked up his phone and called Halden. Howen answered on the second ring, voice already awake. Mercer. I read Kuna, Mercer said. A pause 1 second. Halden didn't ask which Kuna. He didn't have to. You saw it, Halden said. Yes. Mercer replied. That's the first time it's been written down clean. Halden exiled once. It's happened 3 times, he said. This is the first one with numbers that will survive review. Mosa looked down at his own hands. The fingers were thicker now, joints slightly swollen. He remembered new smooth trigger finger and the way it had offended his early assumptions. She built redundancy, Mercuse said. Halden's voice came quieter. She did, he said. And she's not done. A rehook in Halden's last sentence. Unadorned. Mosa waited. What changed? He asked. Howen hesitated just long enough for Mosa to hear the weight behind the line. Hargrove testified. Yesterday, Halden said. Mosa's stomach tightened. In what room? He asked. Because rooms mattered. Closed session? Halden said. Oversight. 2 attorneys. 1 general counsel, 90 minutes. Mosa's mind flashed to Hargrove's face in the ops room. The clean folder, the tight smile. Then to the moment, it went still when slid the sealed drive across the table. What did he say? Mosa asked. Howen answered. He said he made a judgment about force cohesion and perception management, and that he didn't anticipate tactical cost. Mosa felt the word anticipate land like grit between teeth. He didn't anticipate. Mosa repeated. Halden's voice stayed flat. No, he said. He didn't admit intent. He admitted error. Mosa stared at the printed packet on his table. Shooter casualty at 1402. Replacement shooter engaged at 1406. The numbers didn't care what Hargrove admitted. And New Mercer said. Halden's breath came through the line. A small audio artifact. She was in the room. He said not to speak, to be present. Mosa closed his eyes for 2 seconds. Presence in those rooms was a kind of violence. It forced people to look at the human object their abstractions had been built on. What did she do? Mozo asked. Halden's voice held the smallest shift. She wore her uniform, he said. Sleeves down, no range trophies, no stories. She brought a notebook. When they asked for numbers, she gave numbers. Mosa pictured it new in a room with polished wood and filtered air, answering in the same tone she had used on the ridge when mortars walked closer. A rehook arrived with no fanfare. The correction was moving into institutions. Moser opened his eyes. You're calling me because you want me to do something, he said. Halen didn't deny it. We want you to sign the new doctrine revision, he said, as an external validator. The old guard is going to say it's overcorrection. Your signature shuts them up. Mosa looked at his coffee cup, the surface vibrating slightly as the machine finished. He thought of the memo he had signed in 2019. He thought of the addendum he'd written years later to undo it. You will send it, Mercer said. Halden's voice softened barely. Thank you, he said. Mosa ended the call at 6:44 and stood alone in his kitchen for 11 seconds listening to the refrigerator hum. Justice delayed did not arrive as a verdict. It arrived as revised text and signatures that admitted the past without theatrics. He drank his coffee while it was still too hot and felt the burn on his tongue like a small penance. He flew to Washington 9 days later, leaving at 7:05, landing at 11:22. The time change pulling at his joints as if his body resented bureaucracy even in the air. The building was a familiar kind of sterile glass, beige carpet, security badges, fluorescent lights calibrated to look neutral. Neutral light made it easier to pretend decisions were clean. Mosa was escorted to a conference room at 1310. The table was long, seats set for 12, but only 6 were occupied when he entered. Howen was there, uniform pressed, 2 attorneys in suits, a general counsel with a small pen on the lapel, and New, seated at the far end, notebook open, pen resting against the spine. She looked different in this room, not smaller, not larger, simply relocated like a rifle placed on a different surface. Her face was still. Her eyes tracked Mosa when he entered, but her expression did not change. Moses sat 2 chairs down from Halden. He He did not sit near, because proximity could be interpreted as alignment. An alignment in these rooms was something people try to weaponize. The General Counsel began. We're here to finalize doctrine adjustments for sniper element redundancy and cross-training. She said her voice was practice calm. Master Chief Mosa, you reviewed the draft. Mosa nodded. I did. The council slid a binder across the table. Mo opened it. The language was precise. Minimum 2 personnel per element trained to shooter-level competency. DOE procedures standardized. Tape-based redundancy mandated for all optic systems. Training logs auditable. Classification barriers reviewed under Operational Risk Framework. Operational Risk Framework. Words people use to tone ethics in a checklist. Most are read anyway, line by line, because the devil lived in footnotes. An attorney spoke at 1317. We anticipate pushback regarding role clarity and unit cohesion, he said. He glanced briefly toward New and then away as if the glance had been accidental. Mosa felt the old phrase force cohesion echo in his mind. Halden didn't speak. He let Mosa do what Mosa had been brought here to do. Mosa closed the binder at 1323. This is correction, he said, not experimentation. The council nodded. We'll need your signature and a statement of rationale, she said. Mosa looked down at the paper. He could have written something safe, validated by field events. He could have kept it bloodless. Instead, he wrote 2 sentences, each one plain enough to survive scrutiny. On the 1st of March, 2026, a mortar crew at 4012 M was neutralized by a soldier who had been assigned to ammunition transport. The delay between hidden capability and tactical necessity is an operational liability. He signed at 1326. He slid the paper back. Silence held the room for 4 seconds. Then the council said, "Thank you," and moved to the next item as if they had just approved a budget. Mosa watched New's pen move in her notebook, writing down something small, likely the clause number, likely the date, then stop. Her hands went still again. After the meeting ended at 1341, Mosa stood and gathered his coat. No stood too. Halden was already being pulled aside by an attorney, talking quietly. No approached Mosa in the hallway, stopping at a distance of 1 meter. Close enough to speak. Far enough to keep it professional. Her voice was low. You didn't have to write it that way, she said. Mosa looked at her face. He saw the same restraint he had seen behind the rifle. Yes, he said. I did. No's eyes held his for 2 seconds. Then she nodded once. She did not thank him. She did not praise him. She simply said, the next class starts in 11 days, and turned away, walking down the hallway without looking back. A rehook, quiet as a door closing. The wake was continuing regardless of who felt absolved. Mosa returned to the plateau range 11 days later at 5:58, arriving before the students, because arriving early was a habit he could not kill. The wind was already moving at 9 knots. The sky was clay. The sun had not yet crested the eastern ridge, leaving the targets in blue shadow. No stood by the wind tower, reading the sensors 2M, 5M, 10M. She wrote the numbers down, 9, 12, 14. Then she wrote temperature, -3 degrees Celsius. Then density altitude, 2,980 feet. She did not look up while she wrote. She didn't need to. The range wasn't going anywhere. Raske approached from the equipment shed at 604, carrying a crate of sandbags. He set them down one by one, each bag landing with a dull thud. He had gained 3 kilograms since the ridge muscle and winter weight. His face looked a little older, too, lines around the eyes deeper, not from sadness, but from days squinting into wind. He nodded to Mosa once. Master Chief, he said. Mosa nodded back. Sergeant. Raske paused. She doesn't like speeches, Raske said quietly, glancing toward Nell. Moser answered. Good, he said. See, speeches aren't training. Rass's mouth tightened in what might have been a smile. You should see the way they show up now, he said. Not for legends, for numbers. At 612, the students arrived. 18 this cycle, not 16. Ages 21 to 39. 2 were women. 6 had prior sniper training. 12 did not. They lined up at the firing line, rifles cased, eyes forward. No stepped in front of them, clipboard in hand. She didn't introduce herself with biography. She didn't say where she came from. She didn't say what she had done. She said, "Today you will see an F by 720. If you don't confirm, you don't move back." This isn't personal. It's physics. A student shifted, adjusting his sling. No's eyes tracked the movement without comment. Then she added, "At 10:30, one of you will be asked to shoot after running 400 m uphill in kit. You will not be warned which one." No one spoke. The line tightened to rehook. Simple and effective training was going to include the thing people avoided naming: stress. Mosa watched Nu walk behind the line as the students began unpacking. Her gait was clean. The thigh wound had healed into a pale line that would never be fully invisible. She did not hide it, but she did not display it either. Her sleeves were down. Her face was unreadable. At 6:37, she stopped behind one student. Young, 22, hands shaking slightly as he mounted his optic. No reached out and placed 2 fingers on the student's wrist. Not forceful, just contact as if checking the pulse of the system. The student's hand steadied by a fraction, nor withdrew her fingers. She said one sentence. "If your body shakes, your process doesn't," she said. The student nodded once, swallowing. Misa felt something in his chest ease. This was the epilogue most people never wrote. Not the shot, but the slow manufacturing of reliability. At 10:29, No looked down the line and pointed once. "Number 7, she said. A student blinked, surprised. He was 28, medium build, rifle already set. He stood quickly. No, handed him a sandbag and a strip of tape. "Run to the marker," she said. "Back, then shoot at 600. The marker was 200 m uphill and 200 back. 400 total on a grade that averaged 12 degrees. The student ran. His breathing was ragged when he returned at 10:33. His cheeks were flushed. His hands trembled as he tried to settle into position. No did not tell him to calm down. She said, "Tape," and held her hand out. The student fumbled with the strip. No, took it, wrote 4 numbers on it in 9 seconds, and stuck it to his turret housing. 600 m, elevation, wind hold, temp adjustment. Then she said, "Read it," and waited. The student read aloud, voice shaky, nor nodded once. "Now do it," she said. The student fired. The steel at 600 rang. The student froze for a moment, then exhaled hard. No didn't praise him. She simply said again and stepped back. The student chambered another round. Mosa watched the line absorb the lesson. Not inspiration. Procedure under oxygen death. A rehook landed without explanation. This is how the ridge was prevented. At 16:41, as the day ended and the students cleaned rifles, Mercer walked to the far end of the range alone where the long targets were set. 1,800, 2,100, 2,400 steel plates that looked like thin shadows against rock. The wind shifted to 17 knots. The flag snapped. The light turned gold, then gray. He heard footsteps behind him. Nu approached, stopping 2 m away. She didn't ask why he was standing out here. She knew people like Mosa came to the long line because the long line was honest. No looked downrange, eyes narrowed slightly, reading mirage with the same stillness MSA had seen on the ridge. Mosa spoke without turning. "They can tell this story wrong," he said. Nu's voice came. "Even they already do," she said. Mosa nodded once. "They'll call you an exception," he said. "A miracle, a headline." No didn't react. "Then it's our job to make it boring," she said. Moses turned his head toward her. "Boring," he repeated. Nur nodded once. "Replicable," she said. "Auditable. Logged." The last word, logged, carried the weight of her entire approach. Competence recorded. Capability made normal. Mosa looked downrange again. He saw in his mind the opening image, a rifle across 2 sandbags cut open and stuffed with shale. A sergeant barking words meant to stop an accident. A young woman pressing a trigger as if time belonged to her. He understood now what had been built in darkness. Not a shot, a system that refused to waste people. The sun dropped behind the ridge. The wind kept moving. No shifted her weight forward, already tanning back toward the firing line where the students waited for final instructions. Her body angled into what came next rather than what had happened before. Mosa watched her go, and in the thinning light, he could almost hear the old bark again. Put that rifle down. Answered not by argument, but by hand settling on bags, pencil on tape, breath measured in seconds, and a rifle held steady long enough for the future to continue forward.